أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters, this is Ustadha Amina Blake with you, and today we're going to talk just a short while about ourselves, and we're going to reflect on what our values are and how they might impact on our relationships, in particular our marital relationships. Now, whether we like it or not, in Western society in particular, and really globally, we have a concept which has really crept into all our communities. Although, actually, as Muslims, we like to think of ourselves as kind of standalone and that nothing affects us and that we're just Islamic and that's it. But actually, when you come to the area of culture, actually culture has a big influence on all of us, and individualism is something that has a massive impact on all of us. It's all around us. So individualism, what is it? It's a concept that discourages reliance or the handing over of responsibility, I guess, to other people. So, for example, handing over the responsibility of our finances, for example, to somebody, or handing over the responsibility of looking after us to somebody. In the West, that's seen as a very negative thing to do. We are encouraged to be fully independent all the time. We are encouraged to not rely on anybody else. So it's seen almost as a weakness if, for example, a wife relinquishes her responsibility financially so that she can be reliant on her husband, even though last generation and the generation before, that was completely normal. So individualism really is a very modern and new thing. And a really interesting example is sometimes in the West, well, often in the West, we have the elderly who will live alone because, of course, the family structure has been broken up now largely in the West. And they struggle to retain independence, even if they are so sick that they are suffering. They would rather be independent and suffering often than be dependent on either the family or the state or somebody else. And it's also often the social services actually who encourage people and make sure that people are becoming dependent on them because it's for their own well-being. So you can see from this how the emotional state of mind, and we see individualism all around us. We see it in our schools, we see it in the media that we watch. So it's not something that we can park on one side, my dear brothers and sisters. It's an emotional state of mind. So rather than trying to park it on one side, we should be able to recognize it in ourselves. So other cultures, for example, don't always have this value, and this is a set of values, of course. Other cultures have a choice to be dependent, and they're actually seen as empowering in some cultures, or enabling an individual to relax. So, for example, in some Japanese culture, an individual, when they're maybe highly stressed or they have problems, they can actually hand over responsibility to a family member or to anybody they please for themselves for a certain while. Now, when when a wife chooses to rely, for example, on a spouse, on their husband, um, this is seen as something very negative in our society. And so we must question, could the high divorce rates within our communities, within our Muslim communities, be partly due to a mix of bringing values of being an individual, not wanting to rely on anybody else, to the marriage table? What are our expectations? Wives are very much unwilling to hand over responsibility to their husband. And maybe the husband nowadays expects his wife to be economically independent. He expects her to work. And I see many stories which sadden me coming through of brothers who are expecting their wives to work and contribute to the household, even though, as we know Islamically, the wife doesn't have to do that. Now, of course, if this is an agreement between a couple and they're both happy with that, then that's absolutely up to them. But what we can't be doing, my brothers and sisters, is forcing a set of values which is actually quite alien to Islam onto our spouse after marriage. If we've married under a certain set of values, then we have to work together as a team. In individualism, my dear brothers and sisters, imagine that the brother is on the one side, the husband's on the one side of a rope, and the wife is on the other side of the rope, and it's like a tug of war. They're both pulling away from one another, trying to retain their individualism as well as trying to remain married and happy. As you can imagine, this very rarely works. If a wife is also working and she is also expected to manage the house and manage the children, could this almost reduce or remove the need for the husband and his duty? So his role essentially then becomes one of only producing children. So no wonder many men nowadays feel emasculated, feel like their duty as a man is being taken away, but it's not being replaced by anything else. My dear brothers and sisters, however you decide to choose a spouse, however you decide to place your set of values on the table before you get married, be careful and be aware that the person who you're considering might not hold the same set of expectations and values as you. It's very common nowadays for somebody in the West maybe to marry somebody who is not from the same background, don't have a set of individualistic values, who have quite traditional expectations, and then that's seen as dhulam or oppression or forcing somebody to do something they don't want to do. But actually, my dear brothers and sisters, what you need to do is to explore first yourself. Think to yourself, what are my values? What am I bringing to the table? What do I expect of a spouse? Sisters, do you expect a husband who is going to be much more hands-on with the kids and, be much more the sort of modern Western man, if you like, even though that's the same as the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well? Or are you expecting somebody who is much more traditional to bring home the bread and butter, bring home the wages each month and have that role? So we must be aware of this. Brothers, what are you expecting from your wife? Do you want a high-flying solicitor or lawyer or doctor, who of course is going to be in the home much less? Or are you expecting somebody who is going to be much more traditional and stay at home? Don't go into a marriage trying to change somebody's values, because it's a recipe for disaster and it's a recipe for misery, and it possibly might be a recipe for not only the failure of your marriage, but a failure to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah 3, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, do not be divided amongst yourselves. And my brothers and sisters, this includes being divided in our marriages, in our families, fathers to daughters, husbands to wives, brothers to sisters. Don't be divided. Don't be an apologist. Don't be this Muslim who apologizes for having your set of Islamic values and, like the octopus changing the colour of its skin, changing to blend in with wider society. Be proud of your values. Carry your values with a happiness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them to you. And actually, these are values that will add to society, not take away from it. Jazakumullah khair. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.